This is an industrial apiary dated to the late 10th or early 9th century BC. It was already published, and you can see how we discovered it. I don't have the time to discuss it in detail. You can see the reconstruction. I'm sorry, almost can't see a thing. But you can see the beehives here, and here, of course, a nice illustration, if you want, to the famous biblical idiom, a land flown with milk and honey. Those beehives are based on tradition that is well known to us in Egypt back to the 3rd millennium BC, but unknown to us anywhere else in the ancient Near East from archaeology. But this tradition, as we know, continues all the way to our own age, as you can see in this one example out of many of ethnographic examples for such beehives in modern Near East. The green city, this green city was destroyed, but it was not a total destruction. In fact, only the area of the beehives, this area, was burned heavily. Other buildings were rebuilt and changed, and as you can see in this picture, in the 9th century, the Blue City, a new building was built here on top of the beehives, but other buildings were just reconstructed, rebuilt, and continued until their final destruction by the mid-9th century. From the 9th century, we also can show a nice sanctuary, an open-air sanctuary with a large courtyard, platforms, standing stones, and probably a building used maybe by the priests behind this courtyard. All this is very, very different from what we know from other Israelite cities. If we look on Chatzor, Megiddo, Tel El-Farah, Shechem, anywhere in Israel, we shall see pillared buildings, pillared stone architecture. This is the hallmark of Israelite architecture. This is not the situation at Tel Rehov. Tel Rehov looks very much different, looks foreign in terms of architecture. As to the material culture, we have here very rich, enormous quantities of finds, especially from the final phase from destruction in the 9th century BC. All this red, slipped, and burnished pottery, which is a hallmark of the 10th century and 9th centuries BC. You can see it here, the typical hand-burnished pottery. There were scholars who called Solomon the red slip king. So here you can see the typical red slip pottery of this age. Of course, we cannot assign it any definite address in terms of historical figures, but it's definitely typical to this period. But we also have a lot of continuity of Canaanite traditions. The painted pottery, which is so characteristic to the Canaanite pottery, of the 11th, 12th, and 11th centuries, still continues to some extent. A kind of debased forms like this tree and so on are still known. The altars, which Talai Ornan mentioned, are very typical to Tel Rehov. We have now fragments of more than 14 such altars, and they are a kind of, I would say, a typical cult object in this site. Again, almost unknown elsewhere. The two that were found at Pela, at Pechal are very similar. They are in the same region, just 7 kilometers away. But other than that, we almost don't know those horned altars. And again, Talai already discussed them. You can see new examples that were found just last year, typical to this period. And of course, already you heard about this interesting, unusual parallel at the area of Meskene Emar on the northern Euphrates, dated to about 300 years earlier in the 13th century. And there is a big question, of course, whether these two can be connected. And this subject already was discussed. Other cult objects from Rehov are unique objects like this last example of a pottery shrine that is well known to us from the late Bronze Age and Iron Age 1. Here is the last example, but the iconography on it that you can see here is very unusual and still unexplained. Rich variety of clay figurines indicate again Canaanite traditions. This is the largest collection of the female goddess playing the drum. We have here more than 8 examples of this one. We have a large collection of seals just published in the last volume of Eretz Israel, seals and seal impressions. Again, they are important because they give us a clue for how the glyptics of this period looked like. For example, there is no one example of inscribed seal from this period. That means all the inscribed seals that were attempted to be dated to the 9th century, for example, the seal of Izebel, which became famous recently, probably are 8th century. We have no examples for inscribed seals anywhere, either at Rehov or any other site from the 9th century BC. But we have also local style of glyptic, like this one, on seal on jar handles, which probably show, in my view, a god standing on hills, on mountains. Very schematic and very simple. Perhaps these were wooden seals that were used, but it's interesting because it may indicate the worship of Baal if we accept this identification. And a very interesting object is this ivory piece showing a male sitting on a throne, unfortunately very much broken, resembling a relief, an ivory relief found at Samaria, showing again probably a king sitting on his throne. This is 9th century, this is the time of the Omride dynasty, and perhaps we can see here a depiction of the king, maybe the king of Israel, sitting on his throne in a very, very unusual piece of art. We have no parallels to this piece where the head, hands and legs were made separately and attached to the main body of this little statuette. We also have good evidence for trade relations, especially in the last two phases, 5 and 4, not in the earliest one, I must say. The earliest one, the Red City, level 6, has no evidence for international trade, but in the two other levels, 5 and 6 and 4, we have good evidence for trade, especially with Phoenicia. Phoenician pottery, like this unusual jar that you see here, in fact it is unique, probably came from Tyre or Sidon, but also Cypriot pottery, as you can see here. We have a lot of examples of Cypriot pottery, and even few interesting shards that came from Greece, from the island of Euboea in eastern Greece, a very unusual feature in the land of Israel. Probably they came through Tyre, where such pottery was found, evidence for relations with the earliest relations with Greece in the late 10th or the 9th century BC for sure, important for dating the Greek Iron Age. Finally, a few words about inscriptions. We have several very short inscriptions from the 9th century. As you know, inscriptions in the 9th century are very rare in this country. We have few inscriptions, Hebrew inscriptions from this period. And here we have several incisions on jars, one of them saying Leshak, perhaps Yud, though this is very unusual, again unique sign. It could be read as a Yud, so in that case it should be Leshakia. Nimshi, Nun Mem Shin. Nimshi is well known to you as once a father, once the grandfather of Jehu in the Bible. He is known to us also from another inscription that is not illustrated here, from another jar found together with the beehives in our level 5. And he is also known from a jar found at Tel Amal, near the Sachne Springs, just a few kilometers west of Tel Rehov. So we have 3 times the name Nimshi in this area, in this region. And I just asked myself whether the family of Jehu, perhaps, if this is the family of Jehu, if Jehu didn't came from this particular region and family. This is a question that should be considered. Now, what can we learn from all this on biblical history or event history and so on? Tel Rehov, with its 10-hectare city, densely built, is one of the largest Iron Age sites in Israel relating to the 10th, 9th centuries. As I said, here we can see, I must skip some of this material. Excuse me for a moment, yeah. In terms of geopolitical in light of the current varied and disputed views concerning the historicity of the United Monarchy, any interpretation of the evidence from our excavations would remain insecure and debatable. I just want to mention that in my view, we should not throw into the wastebasket the entire biblical narrative concerning this state. A limited state with its capital in Jerusalem could include, in my view, the regions mentioned at least as parts of Solomon's administrative districts in Kings 4. The 5th districts include Ta'anach, Megiddo, all Bet She'an, which is at Tzartan below Jezreel, from Bet She'an to Abel Mechola as far